Encampments. Oh my God, there's encampments popping up like tulips all across Canada. I wanted to take a bit of time to talk to you about encampments. There are encampments we're seeing this all across the United States. Students are camping out on their campus, and by and large are calling for an end or a divestment of investments that support Israel, or probably companies related to Israel, certainly the war industry. We started to see encampments popping up in Canada, and the most visible ones started earlier this week. Students from Concordia and McGill set up an encampment at McGill University in Montreal. And now there's a massive encampment at the University of Toronto. There's encampments I've seen at Toronto Metropolitan University, at the University of British Columbia. I saw that there are like pre-encampment stopping tactics that are happening at the University of Alberta. Why are encampments such a popular measure that, in this case, students are taking? Now, I want to say, first of all, I actually don't think it matters whether or not a university has direct ties with Israel. I think that might be a helpful kind of rhetorical thing for answering the question, why are you doing this? Why are you targeting your university? But by and large, it doesn't really matter, because the encampment is symbolic of power, of taking up space, of students saying, this is like the only space that we have real direct claim over through our tuition fees, through our presence on this campus, through our, going in and out of the buildings and walking on the grass and eating here at lunch and spending time on our campus. This is our space. And this issue, the genocide that's happening in Gaza right now, is such a big deal that we are going to physically take the space that is ours, that we have access to. Sure, students could choose to do an encampment in the downtown, in a downtown park. There could be things done like we saw in Occupy, which I'll talk a little bit about the connections between this and the Occupy movement in terms of the tactic. But instead, the students are saying, this is our space, and this issue matters to us so much that we are going to create a physical manifestation of our presence and our opposition to what is happening in Gaza. Now, you can say that's too tenuous. What's the connection? This doesn't actually affect us. But there are so many ways that this is affecting Canadian students and Canadians in general. And students are the ones who have the concentration of their presence, right? Like a physical location where they go. They're the ones that have a little more time than having to work full time. There's not the same kind of consequences that someone who might work at, Service Canada decides to occupy their office over this. They'll probably get fired. Students have more protection than that. They might face police brutality, as we've seen. They might face academic consequences, as we have yet to see in Canada, though I'm expecting that that's coming. But those consequences are quite different than, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my mortgage, my wife's going to leave me, my kids are going to hate me because I can't afford their clothes, right? This is how the state makes protests like this really difficult for people once they are on the job market full time. Once they've gone past that period of their life, or haven't gotten back to that period of their life where they're a student and they actually are able to take the time to make these kinds of radical interventions within society. So here we have students saying, this is unacceptable. Our politicians have not done enough or anything. The university administrators are, a lot of them are like the worst people in the world. There's like maybe one or two exceptions to that rule, but by and large, these are people that rise to the top of institutions in a way that doesn't necessarily privilege the best people necessarily. And they're saying, look, this has gone on for more than 6 months. The death toll in Gaza has near certainly surpassed 40,000 people. We know that it's at least 35,000 people and that there are at least 8,000 people that are missing. And so it has probably surpassed 40,000 people in a population of 2 million people. 80% of commercial infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed. 60% of the residential infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed. And the world is standing back and saying, maybe it'll stop. Maybe there's nothing for us to do. Maybe Israel will come to their senses. While we hear Israeli officials talking about how their ultimate goal, of course, is to completely wipe Gaza off the map. I mean, they themselves are saying this. So these manifestations of dissent, taking space and holding that space, are so important in democratic society. They're so important in the range of tactics that someone might choose of nonviolence, right? If we're going to actually talk about nonviolence as the way to go, setting up a camp and sleeping somewhere is as nonviolent as it gets. And the state still understands that the act of taking space, of holding space, of saying this space is ours and it is in the service for this campaign, is a threat to state power, which is why we're seeing, I mean, in the United States, we're seeing unbelievable violence and repression and, people being shot by rubber bullets or live ammunition. And I mean, it's horrible what's happening in the United States. In Canada, we're seeing a lot of institutions doing these pre-game preparations, right? Fencing off large areas within our institutional grounds, which are often in most places called like the commons, right? Or the gathering space, some sort of collective area of land, literal physical land in our institutions where students are expected to gather there. Now, we are, more than a decade out from a time where there was a powerful and organized student movement. And the students who are experimenting right now with occupations were kids the last time that there was a really powerful and organized student movement in English Canada. Although I guess at this point in their ages, they were probably also kids, at the last time that Quebec also had this powerful student movement that brought down a government. Right? And so we are seeing young people experiment with tactics that have actually always been part of protest and have always been part of demonstrating one's support or opposition to something. I think a lot about Occupy. I still think a lot about Occupy. And I think, one of the great things right now is how Occupy was started, I think it was October 17th. And in Canada, October 17th just meant that you were marching towards what? Winter. Obvious end to your occupation in a lot of parts in Canada, which of course did happen. The longest occupation that happened in Canada happened at McMaster University because the students decided to occupy inside, and they created an amazing space in the student center, which is not actually student owned. And so shout out to those folks, and there's a lot of those folks who are still around doing some very radical and excellent work. But Occupy was this expression of, we are so sick with this society. We are so sick of income inequality and the power that the 1% has as a result of all of the income that they've accumulated, that we are setting up in this public space and we are not leaving. Now, there were a lot of problems with Occupy, and one of those problems was that it was kind of like call to action, and people reacted to that call to action and then didn't necessarily have the organizing supports and structures to make sure that those actions could stay as long as possible. I mean, they did stay for several weeks, and I was in and out of the Occupy camp in Toronto a lot, and I had also the opportunity to visit Occupy camps in Ottawa and Vancouver while they were going on, and there were a lot of lessons learned, and I hope that folks are transmitting those lessons to the student organizing that's happening right now. But that physical presence to remind the world that income inequality is cancerous to society, it's unjust, it causes unbelievable suffering. That the physical manifestation of something that all of us experience every single day forced journalists and people in power to say, oh, people are actually so mad about this that they're willing to take action. That's pretty powerful stuff. And so here we are with a very different issue, although that whole income inequality thing is a thread that kind of gets worse and worse and worse. And today it's far worse than it was even back when Occupy started in 2010. My God, it's been so long. The big question today is this question about peace and a question about security and safety and the survival of Palestinians. It's also about the survival of Israelis. And this is, I think, the thing that I am so confused by, that, you have to be brainwashed to not see that there is no peace in this situation for anybody if one side is annihilating the other side. That the annihilation of Gaza is wrapped up in the annihilation of Israel. And the people who are occupying these spaces, they understand that. They understand that. Whether they're Palestinian themselves, whether they have connections to Palestine, whether they have no connections to Palestine, they're just concerned about this, whether they're Israeli or they're Jewish and they have maybe a direct or an indirect connection to what is happening over there, the people who are engaging in these occupations know that they don't have much political power. They can't call up the prime minister, and even if they could, he probably wouldn't listen to them. And even if he listened to them, he'd probably say, oh man, our hands are tied, US hegemony, they control what we do. And so what is the most powerful way to tell the world that you have power? It's to take up space. It's to take up space. It's to expand your space. It's to say to the world, this is ours, and we refuse what is happening in our name as Canadians, sending weapons to Israel, buying weapons from Israel, supporting the Zionist hegemony or Zionist agreement that exists within Western nations, that this is the just side and actually we totally should annihilate Gaza. Canadians saying, no, absolutely not, absolutely not. And after 6 months, not only is it absolutely not, but we are not going to move until we start to see some changes, until we start to see some rhetorical changes and actual changes, and no more talk and no more of this Mark Miller saying, oh, we're going to bring more people from Gaza, except not actually bring anybody at all. And no more talk from Melanie Joly, who says, I don't even know, a whole lot of n'importe quoi. And no more talk from the Prime Minister of Canada, who says that he cares about human rights, except he so obviously doesn't. And no more talk from university administrators talking about how these camps are breeding grounds for anti-Semitism because you can't say viva, viva intifada. I mean, yeah, actually, viva, viva intifada. Long live the uprising against the oppression that people are experiencing in Palestine. And the nice thing about the occupation and the nice thing about how organized people are in this stuff is that these smears, these lines, this rhetoric, it's not working. It's not holding. So if you are occupying something right now, you're sleeping in a tent, I mean, thank you. My heart goes out to you folks. I have slept in a tent a couple of times for actions, and I know that it's not easy, and I know that it's not super fun, but you are doing really, really important work. And if you aren't at one of these occupations and you want to know how to help people, know that your physical presence is really, really necessary. Even if you don't camp out, you can always head down. You can always see if people need any supports, whether that supports with taxi fares or bus passes or food or anything warm, or maybe you've got an old tent lying around. Maybe you've got sleeping bags that you can donate to the cause. There's lots and lots and lots of ways for you to help out. Just look for those calls for help in whatever part of Canada that you're in. And use these occupations as an excuse to talk to politicians to say, this is so important. This is so important. And so not only do I want you to do these things related to protecting Gazans or to stopping Israel's genocide, but I also don't want to see or hear any attacks on these students, any injunctions trying to clear them out, as we've seen McGill already failed at that. And congratulations to the lawyers who I know, some of the lawyers who did that amazing work. And that as Canadians, you want to take away our power at every single level. You want to create wealth inequality that is so pernicious that people have to choose between volunteering and eating or going to a protest and paying their rent because they just don't have the time, because they don't have the money and they're working all the time. You want to create a society like that? Then you're going to have these kinds of nonviolent resistances pop up from the people who are best placed to be able to do it. And if you want to stop that, then you're going to push people into violence.